We move, sir. Mamzu.
Oh, Mamzungu, thank you very much. Bongega cool, Mama.
Yeah.
Can we have a seconder?
Honorable Faber, I'll second.
Honorable Faber, goeiemorgen meneer en baie dankie for seconding. Today, honorable members, we are going to be getting a briefing from the department on matters that we always deal with at an international level that relates to United Nations and some of its ancillary bodies and so on. I'm going to give Deputy Minister, Comrade Botes, to introduce his delegation, do the setting the scene opening remarks, and then hand over to whoever will be doing the presentation. It is only at that stage that we will be able to interact with the presentation. Comrade Botes.
Good morning, Slalo. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, you are very audible, very, very much audible. You are very formal. You are very executive-like. That's good. You are representing us very well.
No, Slalo, to you and the members of the Portfolio Committee. With me, Honorable Chair, it's the Director General of DERCO, Mr. Zain Dango, who will obviously lead our presentation, home piano. Honorable Chair, I just thought I must appreciate the privilege just to do the brief introductory remarks. We are going to reflect as a department, Slalo, on a range of high-level meetings in which we participated during UNGA 77, convened from the 19th to the 26th of September 2022 in New York. I think Chair and members will appreciate it was evidently the very first in-contact session of the general debate since 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic actually commenced. The high-level participation, Slalo, of member states provided the opportunity to deliberate on common challenges facing all countries, including the prevailing geopolitical contestations, as well as new and emerging threats. Honorable Chairperson, the theme of UNGA 77 was entitled A Watershed Moment, Transformative Solutions to Interlocking Challenges. That theme, my submission, Chair, resonated with the multiple of global challenges that all member states face, and the high-level meetings and side events that South Africa engaged with were aligned with our foreign policy priorities for the entirety of the UNGA 77 sessions and the general debate. It was in that particular context, Chair, that the South African delegation participated in and contributed to the high-level discussions on education, global health, sustainable development, climate change, and peace and security. In this regard, there was what we call interdepartmental collaboration, and we have pivoted our work, Chair, with close collaboration with the Departments of Health, Education, Environment, Forestry, and Fishery, and the Presidency, who form part of the high-level delegation. Honorable Chair and members of the PC, we participated in several high-level meetings and side events, including a meeting on pandemic prevention, preparedness and response, which was co-hosted, chaired by South Africa, Sweden, and the World Health Organization and the United Nations Foundation. It was an event, Chair, on reimagining health workforce development in Africa's health security, co-hosted by the AU and South Africa, the ministerial meeting of the non-aligned movement. We also participated in an informal close meeting of heads of states and government on climate change, and a BRICS ministerial meeting, which was hosted by South Africa. In addition, Honorable Chairperson, there was a ministerial meeting of the AU's Peace and Security Council, and an interactive dinner hosted by India for a cross-regional group of foreign ministers to informally discuss the global political situation and issues of common interest. That Chairperson was concluded by our participation in a NAM Ministerial Committee meeting on Palestine and a meeting on women's leadership in multilateralism. I would obviously, Chair, like to point out the context in which UNGA 77 was convened. I think our submission, Chair, is that it have convened against the backdrop of unprecedented geopolitical contestations that we are experiencing, which our submission is, it has consequently very serious repercussions on the UN's development agenda and multilateral cooperation. I must indicate, Chair, that in this regard, the general debate was unfortunately overshadowed by the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, which has widened divisions at the UN and has heightened the levels of uncertainty globally. On a positive dividend, Chairperson, there was a very fortified voice which arose from the developing South, notably Africa, Latin America, and Asia, which deplored the polarization of the United Nations and strongly called for the upholding of the principles of the UN Charter and efforts to strengthen multilateralism. It was within that context that the Russian-Ukraine conflict, Chair, the developing South opposed the mounting pressure on member states to take sides and advance strong calls for peaceful negotiations towards a political settlement to the end of the war. Honorable Chairperson and members, despite the outlined challenges that we have highlighted and concomitant institutional challenges facing the United Nations, including the need for reform, in particular the reform of the Security Council, it is our submission, Chairperson, that the organization remains the most viable global mechanism for advancing multilateral engagement to address the challenges that threatens global peace and security. It is the most able instrument and organization to address the impediments to sustainable development, to be the proponent for the promotion and the protection of human rights, as well, Chairperson, as the vanguard in relation to international law upon which the UN Charter is predicated. And therefore, Honorable Chairperson and members of the PC, it is our submission that South Africa will continue to participate actively in the UN system to contribute to discussions towards the revitalization of the UN and to advance efforts to make it fit for purpose and to strengthen its resolve, Honorable Chairperson, to build a global system of governance based on standardized international norms and predicated on the rule of law. In conclusion, Slano, I think it is our submission as the South African government regarding our participation at the United Nations, that it is the most important global vehicle to address our triple challenges of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. But these challenges, Chairperson, is also challenges that has a universal effect, affecting in particular your less developed countries, the global south, and most of your developing economies. Accordingly, Chair, South Africa will maintains the view that the maintenance of international peace and security has a dialectical relationship between cessation of hostilities and sustainable development. And it is our submission, Chairperson, that resolution of international conflict should be peaceful and in accordance with the tenets of the UN Charter and the principles of international law, which underpins its significance in the global system of government. Therefore, Chair, the high-level week of UNGA 77, which takes place annually in September, is a critical forum for heads of state and government, ministers of foreign affairs and international relations, and amongst others, other stakeholders, to engage deeply in the advancement of a foreign policy dispensation that is based on social justice. Thank you very much, Slalo.
Thank you very much, Comrade Deputy Minister. Over to you, Ndate Dango, the DG of the department.
Good morning, Honorable Chair, honorable members, Deputy Minister Botha. After that rather comprehensive comments from the Deputy Minister, I'm going to hand straight over to our Chief Director, UN, to give the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, DG. Chairperson, members of the Portfolio Committee, Deputy Minister Botha, and other colleagues in the briefing today. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to brief you on the recent general debate of the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly. You have before you a PowerPoint presentation, which has been circulated. I'll speak to the presentation. I won't go necessarily according to the slides as they are, but I will speak to it and provide more detail on the various engagements that the Deputy Minister spoke about to indicate to you the purpose of these discussions and what South Africa's engagements in these meetings, to indicate how what we derive from these engagements and how we wanted to utilize these various meetings at the general debate to advance our foreign policy priorities. So firstly, just to indicate, as the Deputy Minister said, the general debate took place on the 19th to 26th of September. The general debate of the General Assembly is an annual gathering of heads of state, delegations and member states of the United Nations. And it's the kickstart, it kicks the start of the annual calendar of the United Nations. So we've now gone into the 77th General Assembly, which is essentially the 77th year of the United Nations existence. And the general debate presents almost, and often in our explanation as to what the general debate represents, we often use the analogy that it is like the opening of Parliament. It represents an opportunity for member states to outline their priorities for the organization and also their national priorities in the area of multilateralism and global relations. And following the general debate, then the work starts in the various UN organs throughout the year until the next September when the next session begins. So it represents essentially a high-level global dialogue where countries utilize the opportunity to advance their foreign policy priorities. This year was the first in-person one, as the Deputy Minister indicated, following a fully in-person general debate since the start of the COVID pandemic. And therefore, it resulted in a large number of high-level attendance. The theme of the session, and it is chosen by the President of the General Assembly, who serves for 1 year or for 1 UN year, which is basically from September to the next September. And this year it was the turn of Eastern Europe to chair the General Assembly, and the current president is from Hungary. As the Deputy Minister indicated, it was a watershed moment, transformative solutions to interlocking challenges. And the interlocking challenges, as the Deputy Minister indicated, are various. They obviously start from the building or the rebuilding of in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic. But the challenges that were existing at the time and the new and emerging challenges that have emerged in the last few months, particularly emanating out of the conflict in Europe, but also existing challenges like counterterrorism, climate change, migration, etc. And the idea is for UN member states to work collectively or seek common solutions to these challenges. Following the unfortunate withdrawal of President Ramaphosa from the official program, the South African delegation was headed by the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Dr. Naledi Pandor. Minister Pandor was supported by several ministers, including the Minister in the Presidency, Minister of Health, Minister of Basic Education. And these ministers attended and participated in high-level meetings, which I'll elaborate on, pertaining to their specific areas of focus and the areas of within their mandates. The key events that South Africa actively participated in during the high-level week included, firstly, the high-level and the flagship event that was hosted by the Secretary General, which was focused on transforming education. The issue of education is one of the key goals within the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which was adopted by heads of state in 2015, with a 15-year period for implementation. Unfortunately, over the last few years since its implementation, the implementation of the goals has been faced with lots of setbacks, including the pandemic and now the global recession in terms of as a consequence of the conflict in Ukraine. So a focus on the implementation of the goals, and specifically in this case on the issue of ensuring that education and the rights or the goals pertaining to education are implemented, was a focus of the Transforming Education Summit. Other events that were significant was looking at the SDGs as a whole and looking at how we are faring as member states or not faring as member states in terms of our implementation of all the 17 goals. There was an event on reimagining health workforce development in Africa's health security, which was co-hosted by the African Union and South Africa. There was an event on looking at pandemic prevention, preparedness and response, which was co-hosted by South Africa, Sweden, the World Health Organization and the United Nations Foundation. The Deputy Minister alluded to the higher-level meetings pertaining to the ministerial meeting of the Non-Aligned Movement. There was a meeting of the heads of state on climate change, the meeting of the G77, etc. Chairperson and members of the Portfolio Committee, I think it's clear from the high-level meetings that I've highlighted that a large focus was of the engagements at the general debate was focused on development issues. Despite peace and security issues, specifically the war in Ukraine, taking up a large part of the global headlines, these all have had a detrimental impact on the global development agenda. So the focus by member states and the Secretary General and the President of the General Assembly was to ensure that there is a refocusing on how do we, despite all these challenges, how do we ensure that the development goals, whether it is on health, education, issues pertaining to the advancement of women, etc., are put back onto the agenda and are advanced. South Africa's general debate statement, which was the flagship statement that we or the flagship event that we participated in, and Minister Pandor delivered South Africa's national statement. The key areas of focus in the national statement was, one, on the institutional reform of the multilateral system. That if we are to have a multilateral system that is able to address all these global challenges, we need a rules-based international multilateral system predicated on international law and one that is inclusive, that includes all member states, particularly developing countries and African countries that have been marginalized. Secondly, we highlighted the economic and economic impact of COVID-19 and the need to create and support research and innovation capacity in Africa, specifically for vaccine production, and invest in public health systems. Thirdly, we looked at addressing global energy shortages, including developing or deploying innovative solutions that are cheaper, cleaner, and more accessible. The global energy issues are issues that not only affect South Africa, but are issues that is, as you have seen, affecting almost every country in the world, developed and developing countries. Countries in Europe, as they go into winter, because of the particular challenges within their region, are facing serious energy challenges. So how do we look, and in the context of the COP meeting that's taking place in Sharm el-Sheikh, a large part of focus of the discussions that took place during the general debate was how do we find solutions to ensure sustainable energy and reliable energy for all countries, noting that this is key to achieving development priorities. Other areas that we focused on in our national statements was investment in quality education, the impact of climate change, implementation of the SDGs, issues pertaining to nuclear disarmament, where unfortunately, for the first time in decades, the nuclear threat has become very real. Particularly in the context of what's going on in Ukraine, but also due to the failure of the recent review conference of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, where unfortunately member states have not been able to agree on how to manage and control issues pertaining to nuclear weapons. And this, of course, makes all of us unsafe. Other issues that we raised related to promotion of peace and security and stability, particularly through fostering political dialogue, addressing conflicts that remain, particularly long-standing conflicts such as the issue of Palestine and the pursuit of a two-state solution, the issue of Western Sahara's struggle for self-determination, and ending the embargoes against Cuba and coercive measures against Zimbabwe. We also focused on the elimination of all forms of discrimination, the promotion of youth and women empowerment, as well as ending gender-based violence, including in conflict situations, and most importantly, prioritization of the African agenda, including strengthening UN and African Union cooperation. That was the thrust and the overall objectives of that, or the areas that we focused on in the general debate. And essentially, that will form the basis of South Africa's engagements over the next few months in the various UN meetings and UN initiatives that will take place to focus and advance these specific areas that I've enumerated. The Deputy Minister outlined the context and the uncertainties that permeated the discussions, particularly in the context of the conflict in Ukraine, but also in the context of the slow recovery from COVID-19, a faltering world economy, and the food, energy, and financial crisis generally. The one positive element that I want to highlight that emanates out of a meeting like the general debate is that it fosters engagement. The general debate represents perhaps the essence of multilateral global engagement. The South Africa alone, as one member state out of 193, during the 5 days that the high-level meetings took place, South Africa participated in, besides bilateral meetings, just all the high-level meetings, at least 20 to 30 meetings. And then you've got to add all the bilateral meetings. That would be countless meetings that member states embarked on during that week with each other to try and find solutions to global challenges. Out of this is the essence of what we've been promoting, the need to engage, the need for dialogue to ensure that countries work together. Of course, all these discussions are not always amicable and they're always not productive, but out of these, at least there's a sense of working together in dialogue to achieve these objectives. I wanted to, and Chairperson, if I do have time, I thought I'll go into some of the specific meetings and some of the key areas of priority that we focused on, and what were the sense of or the global dynamics pertaining to those issues. And I'll start off with UN reform. UN reform is something that we have spoken to you about in the past, and it's been on the agenda of the United Nations for a number of decades. UN reform is not just about the Security Council, but it is about ensuring that the organization as a whole, the General Assembly, the Economic and Social Council, the Human Rights Council, all of these are effective. They're able to address its work in a representative and cohesive manner. But at the heart of this is a reform of the Security Council. The Security Council being the global body that is entrusted with international peace and security, that has specific prerogatives that no other international body has. This body remains the most unrepresentative body within the multilateral system and the UN system. And Africa, many developing countries, but the African continent specifically, remains out of the permanent category. We remain marginalized. And it's particularly concerning in the context of the fact that a large number of the issues, or the majority of issues that are dealt with by the Security Council, pertains to conflicts on the African continent. So this is an issue we raised as South Africa, but many heads of state, particularly the chair of the African Union, the president of Senegal, highlighted the importance of a revitalized and more urgent efforts that need to be placed on reforming the United Nations, and specifically the Security Council. There was one positive element that emanated out of this and out of the discussions, and that was the statement by the United States to also call for reform. Now, this has been seen as perhaps an effort by one of the key P5 members to inject some momentum in the debate. We are trying, when we have been engaging with the United States, to see what are they planning to do in terms of raising this matter by the head of state at the general debate. What are they hoping to achieve with the reform discussion? Because ultimately, reform, because of the nature of the UN Charter, reform lies in the hands of the Permanent Five. We cannot have reform unless there's political will from the Permanent Five to ensure that there's positive momentum towards reform, because of the manner in which the Charter is drafted. The intergovernmental process, which looks at reform in the General Assembly, will begin its work very soon. And we hope that there will be some new momentum, particularly in the context of the failure of the United Nations and the Security Council in particular to address key conflicts. We've seen the stalemates when it came to Syria. We've seen the stalemates when it came to Ukraine in the last year, the failure of the Council to act, which necessitated the General Assembly to deal with the matter. And we've seen the stalemates in the Council for decades on issues like Palestine. So there's urgent need for that to occur. Other key meetings that I thought I should elaborate a bit more on, I did touch a bit on the Transforming Education Summit and did indicate the relevance of this in the context of the implementation of the SDGs. The summit provided a unique opportunity to elevate education to the top of the global political agenda and mobilize action, ambition, solidarity, and solutions to ensure that education is able to, or the targets that we set in reaching education for all is reached, despite the setbacks of the pandemic. There was meetings on climate change, as I indicated, specifically in preparation for the COP that's taking place in Egypt. Under the chairship of Kenya's president, on the 21st of September, the Committee of African Heads of State on Climate Change met, and this was an opportunity to discuss and caucus on Africa's common positions ahead of the COP27 that is taking place in Egypt. I did indicate that South Africa co-hosted an event on pandemic preparedness, prevention, and response. This was an event which we did together with Costa Rica, Sweden, the WHO, and the UN Foundation. And the ministerial high-level event highlighted solutions to strengthen collective capacities against current and future health emergencies. It also fostered resilience, or looked at fostering resilience and progress on universal health coverage, and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals pertaining to health. The event aimed to elevate the urgency of sustained political leadership to meet the current pandemic's evolving challenges. It also looked at comprehensive multilateral solutions for existing and emerging health threats, particularly threats that may come up in future, so that we are better prepared to deal with them. There was, and Deputy Minister Botha mentioned, there was a meeting of the African Union Peace and Security Council at ministerial level, and this was chaired by Ghana and looking at issues pertaining to countering terrorism. The issue of terrorism was, particularly in our sub-region, was perhaps an issue that was somewhat immune to us. It's become an area of threat to the continent, and we face that in our sub-region as well. And the PSC looked at what is it that the continent should be doing to address these threats, including the root causes of that give rise to terrorist groupings emerging on the continent. There was a meeting, an additional meeting that I thought I should elaborate on, was the ministerial meeting of the non-aligned movement on the sidelines of the general debate. This meeting took place on the 21st of September. And the non-aligned movement, which was created decades ago in the midst of the Cold War, and created to create a group of countries, or to look at how developing countries can advance their own independent foreign policy approaches and not take sides. We're in a polarized world that was evident during the Cold War. In the context of the current global relations and the aftermath of Ukraine, the NAM has become all the more relevant, as many developing countries have, and many key members of the non-aligned movement have refused to take sides and have maintained that we are not immune, or we're not agnostic to what is going on in terms of the conflict in Ukraine, but we do have independent positions that may not necessarily be aligned to either side of the conflict. The NAM is being chaired by Azerbaijan, and they are the outgoing chair, and the chairship of the non-aligned movement will be returning to the African continent as Uganda takes over the NAM in 2023. And there's hope that with the return of the NAM to the continent, there's an opportunity to revitalize the movement and to ensure that it plays its role in terms of advancing the interests of those countries that do not want to be drawn into either side of geopolitical tensions. In that context, Deputy Minister Botha mentioned an event or dinner that Minister Pandor participated in with like-minded NAM member states that discussed this very issue of how like-minded developing countries can work within and navigate these global tensions to ensure that our own interests are not sidelined and we do not get drawn into these tensions. There was a meeting of the African Women Leaders Network, and this meeting focused on women's leadership in multilateralism, building peace and promoting inclusive development in times of crisis. And this OLEN, this African Women's Leaders Network, is an Africa-wide movement for women, for the transformation and development of the African continent through women's dynamic engagement and participation in decision-making at all levels of society. And this is in line with Agenda 2063. And the meeting was called, and it looked at emphasizing the importance of advocacy efforts for women's peace building, as well as the inclusion of youth in terms of post-conflict reconstruction and development. Chairperson, I think I should now try and conclude. I'll look at one or two other meetings before I just mention the bilateral meetings that took place. There was also a meeting of Deputy Minister Botha spoke about, the NAM Committee on Palestine, which South Africa is part of. And South Africa, Minister Pandor participated in this engagement and delivered a statement reiterating the importance of ensuring that there is political negotiations to resolve the matter, but importantly, to ensure that there is international action to ensure that the human rights and international law is protected and preserved in the context of the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. Finally, there was a meeting that looked at the total elimination of nuclear weapons. This, as I indicated earlier, has become a problem that's become more real rather than abstract in the context of the global threat of the use of nuclear weapons. I did mention, and the slides to indicate the various bilateral meetings that took place that Minister Pando and the delegation held on the margins of UNGA 77. This included meetings with the President of the General Assembly to discuss his priorities for the upcoming year, but also meetings with the African Union Commissioner for Political Affairs, the President of Ghana, the former President of Tanzania, and several foreign ministers, including France, the Netherlands, Cuba, Russian Federation, Nicaragua, and Latvia. These meetings were to discuss bilateral issues pertaining to South Africa's relations with these countries. There was a memorandum of understanding on the establishment of political consultations that was signed with Paraguay as well. Chairperson, I'll conclude there, and we'd be glad to engage further on these activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I think that concludes the presentation from our side. There are a few senior officials meetings that Mr. Lair didn't mention, but I think we can engage with those if they come up in the question session. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Over to you.
Thank you, DG, Chief Director. Deputy Minister, anything to amplify?
No, Chair, no, Honorable Chair. I think that is the succinct detail as presented by the DG and his team. Thank you very much, Lalo.
Now, what can be? Who's speaking? Okay. Thank you very much, Deputy Minister and DG and your team. Honorable members, there's the presentation. Quite straightforward. Any comment or any question?
Chair.
Mr. Me?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I would have hoped that the presentation would take us into detail on when the presenter says that the UN reform would need the 5 veto to have political will. So my question, Chairperson, is how do we expect the same person that is oppressing you to have political will and stop oppressing you? So these countries that want the UN reform, why don't they then amend whatever that is blocking the UN reform and requires these countries that have veto to approve? Why can't we restructure the whole, for lack of a better word, the whole contract, and that will allow for the UN to be reformed? And then my other question, Chairperson, would go to the Deputy Minister. We've seen quite a number of disregard of the law by the United States of America in South Africa lately, issuing threats of terrorism and now wanting to arrest South Africans regarding terrorism. What is our stance as DIRCO? Is this allowed? Why are we allowing the United States of America to make South Africa now their playfield, their ground, and issue such statements without the department's knowledge? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Austembi. Tatembanz.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and greetings to the Deputy Minister, Alvin Botes, the team that is led by the DG, and the presenter. Chair, I think let us welcome the presentation. It's very much enlightening and very much empowering as far as those engagement that are taking place at the UN. But Chair, what I want to ask, maybe it will somehow be related to what Honorable Msani was raising. The very same issue that we have had of the terror attacks in Sentin and America being the one which is actually announcing that. But I think there is a trend that is going in, because it's not the first time that we have another country, especially the US, making pronouncements on behalf of the country. We remember the issue of the climate change funding, Chairperson, which we were also surprised. Now, I just want to check when these engagements are taking place as member states. Is there a sense of mutual respect amongst the member states, irrespective of whether these are developed countries, a combination of developed countries and underdeveloped countries, and superpowers in terms of economy or political or military? But is the playing field leveled there? Because the practice that we see now, you know, they always say theory and practice are two separate things. There is an element of not respecting the sovereignty of other countries. But I just want to be specific with the US. And here we have also seen the very same country or member state also imposing sanctions in people who are suspected to be ISIS linked here in South Africa, and in particular in Durban. And are we going to be seeing this kind of conduct, while at the same time there are these bilateral and multilateral discussions and engagements amongst member states, but then on the other side, when it's outside those forums, then you see the undermining of other countries, their sovereignty, their security and foreign policies being undermined in that manner. So I just want the team maybe to just empower us on those issues, Chairperson. But nevertheless, I think we'll always appreciate this update, and that at least if they can be not regular, but if there are developments in this kind of engagements, if we can be taken on board as a committee. That would be my short input, Chairperson. Thank you. I'm finished, Chair, but I don't know whether the Chair is still with us or not, or whether my input could be audible. So it's so quiet now. Thank you, Chairperson. not here.
It looks like the chair has a problem. I don't see him here. Leadership.
Can I suggest, Honorable Muela, that you just hold the fort for the chair in the meantime, because I can't do it because I've just been engaging, so I would want to expect the responses. That's my proposal, honorable members. And then when the chair comes back, then you can hand it over back to him.
Yeah, I'm trying to check him on the other side. I'm trying to check the chair in the meantime.
Then it's quite.
Honorable members, I suggest, as suggested by Honorable Mpanza, with your permission, I don't see the chair here on the system. I was trying to locate him. I don't know if he's not yet back. Can we proceed in the interest of time? If honorable members are comfortable.
Let's proceed.
Thank you, Honorable Musane. Well, we had two issues, honorable members. Can we therefore allow the department to come in? DG, Honorable Musane raised some few issues, and Honorable Mpanza. May we allow you to come in and respond and comment?
Thank you, Honorable Muela. So two questions, some of them quite interrelated, and I'll check with the Deputy Minister if he wants to come in, because perhaps elements of it was directed to him. But let me start first, and my colleague, Mr. Layer, and others can come in. On the P5 issue raised by Honorable Nsane, and you know, the Honorable Nsane is very accurate. The P5 may have many differences, but they do share a collective interest in keeping the status quo, in preserving the Security Council and the power dynamics as it is. And that's why the issue of political will is so important, because if we can galvanize the political will amongst the P5 around reform, that'll be an important step. But you know, the issue of the rules of the charter then comes into play. And this is why the text-based negotiations that we favor is so important, because through the text-based negotiations, we don't just ask for the reforms that emerge from the African common position and other bloc's common positions, but we may also then look at how do we change the charter to avoid a situation where changes to the Security Council can only be done if there's unanimity from the P5. So if one member of the P5 disagrees with change, there's no change. And there are clauses within the charter. I can send the details of that to the committee later on, which requires the P5 to agree. And we will need to eventually confront the fact that those clauses may need to change if we're actually going to move substantively with UN Security Council reform. There's a document that we submitted sometime in 2019 or 2020 on request from the Secretary General, where we raised some of these issues in the very specific international legal dimensions of the reform agenda. And Honorable Msane's points to that we need to engage with that as well. It's not just a political issue, but also some of the legal issues associated in the charter. The second set of questions then dealt with differently with the issues of power. And for example, the recent alerts on terror by the US, and we are engaging with the US government. We understand that they have a legal obligation from the side of their mission if they come across any information that they may deem to be a threat to US citizens, and to get that alert out to US citizens in any country, including South Africa. We are engaging with them that notwithstanding that legal obligation, they must work with our own agencies to ensure that the evidence is packaged in a way that it's credible and it doesn't cause undue alarm. And so they are open to engaging with us on that. In the same week that they issued the terror alert in South Africa, they did it in Ghana as well, and Nigeria. So we from our side, we do engage, and we're asking for some kind of alignment. We do understand that this comes from their own domestic legal imperatives that impacts on their missions abroad. But of course, as members have pointed out, it can cause undue panic if the information isn't packaged in a way that is carefully calibrated. On the terror lists, I'm going to ask my colleague, Mr. Laer, just to comment on that a bit, and for him to focus on two areas: the bilateral dimension of it, but also what happens if these lists make their way into the UN sanction lists. What is the impact and consequences for South Africa on that? And perhaps also just a comment on the evidentiary threshold, which is important. In generally the anti-terror legislation globally, but also those that arrive out of the Security Council, have a very low evidentiary threshold because they see anti-terror work as preventative. And generally this is much, much lower than the evidentiary threshold we would require domestically to take even a particular case to court. So if Mr. Laer can just sort of amplify that a bit more.
Thank you, DG, and thank you very much, honourable members, for your questions. Regarding the issue of the terror list, so what has happened thus far is that the US has placed individuals and entities, and I believe it's the first time entities in South Africa have been placed on what they call their OFAC list, which is US Department of Treasury sanctions list. So this is a national issue. They have not placed it on any international list. So these individuals and entities have been placed on a US national terror list. And there's no obligation on member states to implement any of the sanctions. Of course, US businesses, US government entities, etc., would have to implement those sanctions, but no one else is obligated to do anything else with them. But what the US has also indicated is that they intend to list those same names, those individuals and those entities on the UN terror list. So this is the list of the United Nations. And that has very different implications in terms of the obligations of member states and other countries, so outside of the US. So the way that works is that any member of the Security Council, and of course the US is a permanent member of the Security Council, can put forward the names of individuals or entities that they wish to place on the list, on the UN list. And as the Director General has indicated, unlike our legal systems, our national legal systems, where if someone is accused of something, there would have to be proof, and these would have to be tested in a court of law or in a judicial mechanism. There is no such mechanism within the United Nations Security Council. This is one of its deficiencies, that all that is required is for a member state, a member of the United Nations Security Council, to present the names and the allegations. And if no other Security Council member objects to that, that particular name of that individual or that entity is then placed on the terror list. As a result, we have a UN terror list that has several, has names that have been there for a long time, for decades. without these individuals actually having been gone through some kind of legal process or brought before a court of law to test the allegations that have been put forward. And it's not just the United States that have put forward names that have gone before these, that have been listed on these UN lists. It's other members of the United Nations Security Council that have also put forward names that are now on the list. Now, the implications of that is, despite South Africa not being a member of the Security Council, any member state of the United Nations, that is all 193 member states of the United Nations, are obligated by, in terms of the UN Charter, to basically implement the decisions of the Security Council. So these decisions taken in accordance with the relevant chapters of the UN Charter requires member states to enforce those decisions. So that would imply that if the US were to take the next step, which they have not yet done as yet, which is to place these names on the UN list, then all member states, including South Africa, would have to take steps to sanction these individuals and entities. We are not members of the council, so we cannot do anything to stop that from happening. This again comes back to some of the, and the honorable member that raised the structure of the council and the reform that is required is quite correct. This then reflects the challenges that we have and the undemocratic nature of the United Nations Security Council and the urgent need for reform that is required. Thanks, TJ.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's the response from us as the officials. I'm not sure if the Deputy Minister would like to add.
DM, if there's anything you want to add, may
Yes,
you please
no.
come in.
Yes, no, thank you very much. I think what the members obviously have raised is, the relationship between the various multilateral forums, the bilateral relations, and how we utilize that to ensure the hegemony of the South African state in terms of our foreign policy disposition in fine expression. I obviously want to make probably one very key example, Chair. I think members, for example, know that what is our position in terms of the war in Ukraine, that we have been, non-aligned in relation to our posture. And we came obviously under quite a different pedigree of criticism because of that. Be it as it may, Chair, now in October, South Africa was elected to the Human Rights Council of the UN, receiving 182 votes, which really was the highest vote that any country have received for that particular purposes. What it does actually implies, Chair, is that our principal posture is appreciated, in as long as we can obviously substantively articulate our foreign policy posture, and that is appreciated in the entire, world body of member states. Of course, Chairperson, what we have to do as South Africa is at all times to earn our stripes in relation to the advancement and the implementation of our foreign policy dispositioning. I mean, members would appreciate, for example, our contribution together with India at the level of the WTO in relation to the temporary waiver of the intellectual property rights, so that Africa, for example, would be able to manufacture its own vaccine. Those are what I call key areas that defines where we are as a principal state, where we don't just on the side of caution, but at all times we are on the side of the most vulnerable in the implementation of our foreign policy. So it's sometimes in political terms, Chair, there's what it's called the one law of dialectic about unity of opposites. Sometimes we make gains, but at the same time, our foreign policy dispositioning gets tested through, overtures and obviously conduct of, both bilateral partners in bilateral forums and obviously at multilateral forums. And I think what we have done as South Africa is obviously to stand firm on principle. I think that is what our country are being appreciated for, notwithstanding, Chairperson, even when there's an acclamation of criticism against some of our foreign policy dispositioning, as long as it is firmly based, for example, on our value system enshrined in the Constitution, and concomitant to that, Chair, is to ensure that we don't put the issues of the South African national interest on the back burner whilst we advocate for just and fair world system. Ngiyabonga, Nkosi kakhulu Sihlalo.
Thank you very much, DM, for the responses and the entire team, the collective of the department. Are there any other issues, honorable members, follow-ups or any other matter regarding the presentation? Well, I don't see any other hand from honorable members. And it suggests that let's take this opportunity in the absence of any other matter regarding the presentation presented to us as the Portfolio Committee responsible for international relations and cooperation, and thank the department, the deputy ministers, the Youth League Deputy Minister and the Deputy Minister Mackenzie, and the entire collective of the department, the DG and the team. Thank you very much for the presentation, and we really appreciate it. Honorable members, the department, thank you very much for the opportunity and the time given to us. And our meeting is adjourned. Siyabonga.
Siyabonga, Chair.
Thank you, Mama. Bye.
Thank you, honorable members.
Thank you, DG.